This meeting is being recorded.
Hey, Ferdinand.
Hi, Dr. Bender, how are you?
Good.
Good afternoon to everybody.
We're still gathering, so we'll just wait just a second.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, this is part 2 of the presentation that began last week with you, Ferdinand. I will just let that continue.
Yes,
Should I go
please.
ahead and share screen now?
Yes, please go ahead. That screen is very important. It guides my thinking.
Okay. All right, there it goes. Can you see that?
Yeah, I can see it. It's very clear. Thank you, Doctor. So, can I start?
You may start, please.
Yeah, thank you. Good afternoon again to everybody. In Kenya, it's good evening. Today is a continuation of the topic that we presented last Tuesday with Oscar. And the topic is missional leadership in Kenya, a research project that is directed by Oxford Center for Mission directors, Dr. Kirk Franklin and Dr. Susan Veinen. And the research was done by 3 of us, a lady from Canada, Laena Maunula, and a gentleman from UK, Oscar Sue, and then myself, Manjewa, from Kenya. So last time on Tuesday, we presented a lecture that was focusing on how the 3 of us from different parts of the world, from different cultures, could come together for a common cause. And I think those lecture notes are still available, as well as the podcast is available in Oxford for Center Mission website. Yeah, so this is a continuation of it, but it's going to be more of a paper which we generated from the research that we did. Yeah, so the paper therefore is part 2 of this research, an examination of barriers and enablers toward a missional leadership, the case of Kenyan coast. Yeah, so if you can scroll over, I'll quickly go ahead and give the abstract. Missiology is one of the Christian theological disciplines that emerged recently and has been received differently by scholars, though it is commonly anchored on the theological perspective of Missio Dei. Yeah, so in this case, we limit our discussion to 2 scholars, David Bosch and Kirk Franklin, who both of them, of course, they use this concept of Missio Dei. While Bosch pegs transformative Missio Dei perspective in a dual aspect of dimensional and intentional aspect to emphasize a missional theory for reading all Christian disciplines, church history, pastoral theology, practical theology, and so on. On the other hand, Kirk Franklin, referring to the same concept of Missio Dei, has his focus on globalization and localization. And by this, he wants to emphasize the role of local context in shaping understanding of global missional leadership. The goal of this paper is to answer these 2 related questions. What are the barriers and enablers to missional leadership in the 21st century Kenyan context? The second question is, how does the findings influence the conception of Missio Dei missional paradigm? So taking a departure from Bosch and Franklin, in this paper, we argue that although Bosch's view that effective theology of mission ought to embrace a dual function of a dimensional and intentional aspects, this position overlooks the crucial role of social context in shaping missional leadership. Because, for example, in Kenyan coastal social context, while limitations occasioned by identity politics poses barriers to missional leadership, we found that the antidote to this barrier is facilitated by participation of local community. A research methodology and Bosch theological missional paradigm, contextual definition of missional leadership, and barriers and enablers for missional leadership, therefore, are the limitation of discussion for this paper. So with that then, I will move forward and look at the research methodology. Our sampling approach was a purposive sample. In other words, generating a sample of interview participants who have the necessary experience and traits to answer our research question. Our goal was to understand the perspective of those currently involved in missional leadership. In other words, to have them reflect on their experiences and the journey in developing as a leader. So the 11 members of Diocesan Research Unit provided our target sample. Our inclusion and exclusion criteria included those who are currently active members of this Diocesan Research Unit, who are actually engaged in ministry and also or some kind of research. We also used the snowball sampling approach, that is asking participants to recommend others who fit the inclusion and exclusion criteria, that they may also be willing to be interviewed. Sampling continued until the data saturation was reached. In other words, until the same participants repeated in the interview data, and now new patterns or ideas were emerging. So we had to reach that saturation where, we had to listen to the interviewees reaching to a point where they are somehow repeating themselves, and therefore there was new data emerging. And then with that, then we could say here we have reached saturation. However, because of time constraints, the current paper is based on 7 respondents instead of all the 11 respondents. Last week, someone asked a question about why we only spoke with the leaders and not lay people. This was a very good question that emerged in last week's presentation. This is a sampling question, of course. When sampling qualitative interviewing, it is necessary to have sufficient commonality of experience. This means that all participants in a sample need to have sufficient experience within each sample. It would be fascinating to explore the experience of those who are currently not in leadership, but this would need to be a separate sample of interview and a separate data set. It's something we can do in the future. And this is because there would not be sufficient commonality of experience between the leaders and those who are not leaders. And we would not reach saturation in our sampling and analysis. However, it would be interesting to continue interviewing other populations, such as those who are not in leadership, as a separate data set, which could then be compared against our initial results. This is something that we might do in the future. So data collection, an interview guide was developed by the 3 of us, and the semi-structured interviews were conducted by Zoom call. Oscar and Laena had to do the Zoom call, Laena was calling from Canada, Oscar was calling from UK. And on the ground here in Kenya, in the coastal part of Kenya, I was making sure that those who are being interviewed were ready to receive the calls. So these interviews were audio recorded. Interview recordings were not transcribed due to lack of funding. However, having the audio recording allowed the analyst to listen to the recording as needed. Of course, if we had enough funding, as you know, some of us are sort of thinking we would buy these programs for doing the analysis, but we said no. At this point, we don't need to be sorrowful of the fact that we don't have funding. We need to cheer up and just use what is available. So we said we are going to analyze the data, you know, using our own knowledge, as I will explain shortly. So how did the analysis then happen? Qualitative analysis was done by, of course, Manjewa, using thematic analytic approaches proposed by Corbin and Strauss, who published their work in 1990, and Jennifer Attride, who published her PhD thesis in 2001, which was very instrumental in helping to get the techniques. So field data was first coded in reference to semantic aspects to provide consolidated concepts to develop basic, organizing, and global themes. Because this data analysis approach evaded the use of programs for data analysis such as NVivo and Atlas TI, the analysis process was characterized by some challenges for conceptual and thematic developments. So to address these challenges, it called for great care and patience in order to achieve logical results, you know, such as a global theme. These global themes would stand as a summary answer to the research question. In other words, using the principles of thematic analysis proposed by Corbin and Strauss and developed further by Jennifer Attride, we were able to come up with the processes for analyzing this data from the field, beginning with looking at the semantic perspectives, the language aspects of the data. You look at the metaphors and so on and so on, and from them we'll then develop the concepts. From the concepts we develop the themes. Yeah, and then with the themes, we were able to come up with a global theme, which was like a kind of a summary to the research question. So with that, having explained the research methodology, we will need now to move to the next section, which is on Bosch's theological missional paradigm. Bosch noted that Missio Dei entails Trinitarian mediation of the love of God, the Father, the parent of all people. The epiphany that makes the present in the world of the Son and the mediating the presence of God, the Spirit, who blows where he wills. So this is Bosch's view of missiology. It's anchored in the understanding of God as the love of the Father, the parent of all, and also God, the Spirit, the Holy Spirit, who actually mediates the presence of God and moves as he wishes. And then there's the epiphany aspect, which makes the presence in the world of God the Son. This means any missional enterprise, picking it from Bosch, ought to focus on facilitating the deliverance of God's love to the world. The ways for facilitating this love of God must at the same time reflect the love of Christ for humanity and the freedom of the Holy Spirit in transcending cultural and denominational boundaries to procure this divine love. So to move forward from Bosch and inquire more insights from current experiential knowledge, of course, gathered from the field, we may consider contextual definition of mission and missional leadership. So we begin with the mission. Our focus in this case is to find people's conception of mission. And then after that, we also look at people's conception of the significance and definition of this mission, and how the social context contribute to this understanding. So mission, in short, from the data we gathered from the field, can be summarized as a Christocentric planning and transformative assignment. From the interviews gathered from the field research, mission is construed as a Christocentric planning and transformative assignment that ought to borrow a leaf from Jesus and the early church. Consequently, it emerged from the field data, according to Milk respondent, that mission is wanting to do something and doing it, planning for it, and executing it, having an objective that one intends to arrive at and getting to that objective. End of quotes. Accordingly, because one of the respondents again contends that when it comes to Christian mission, someone sends the gospel of God to go and just spread the gospel of God to people, or sometimes to change their standards of living to a particular people, it then implies that mission ought to be transformative on account of employing the values and the norms pegged on the significance of the Jesus story in the Gospels. For this reason, one of the respondents shows that Jesus and the early church provide models for doing mission. And this is respondent number 6. And he said this: you can do mission in meeting physical needs of the people. I look at it like the way Jesus did it, going to the sick, the hungry. Jesus was not only a preacher, but one who would feed the hungry and provide a gown. And that's the kind of thing I would look at. That is what the early church did. They carried out the gospel in teaching, preaching, but also in meeting the physical needs. So then, if mission is construed as a transformative venture pegged on the model of Christ and the early church, how then did the people conceive the meaning of missional leadership? A short summary of the people conception is that a good missional leadership is one that is compassionate, humble, and accepted by the community. It emerged from the data collected for this research that a good missional leader is that kind of a person who portrays a compassionate and humble attitude and is also accepted by the community. Subsequently, the compassionate and humble attitude of the missional leader ought to be shaped by a positive attitude toward criticism. Ought also to be shaped by consultation and the ability to welcome and listen to the needs of others. Thus, 4 respondents of Milk project disclosed the following qualities of a good missional leader. This is as they were answering the question on what are the qualities of a good missional leader. So these 4 respondents said this. The first one said, he answered saying, he really welcomed me. He really helped me to settle down. He had good relationship with the community. He had a lot of respect from the community. End of quotes. The second respondent, concerning qualities of a good missional leadership, he said, an example is that of a parish vicar, that he would often consult me before undertaking activities such as baptism and marriage ceremonies. The third respondent, answering the same question on good missional leaders, he said a good leader was a principal of a Bible college because although he was less educated, but a man that was down to earth. He was able to relate and socialize with everybody, both students, support staff, and other colleagues. He had a listening ear. He would not brush anybody off. He would not turn anybody back. You go with your complaints, your issues. He would listen to them and give you advice and directions. Then the fourth respondent, answering the same question, he said, a good leader is a leader we have to be, as a good leader, we have to be open to different contrary ideas or opinion from other people. Or to some extent, maybe some people would look at it as such a good leader as a failure to make a decision on a particular issue. But for me, I disagree. I look at it as a strength because as a leader, you cannot say as a leader, your ideas are ever going to be perfect. No. So that's the end of quote. These qualities of good missional leaders are pertinent for church missional missions because as one is undertaking a missional task in the field, they are expected to be a trainer who is developing oneself. This is according to one of the respondents who actually said that helping others to train others who can go out to pass to places where the gospel has been preached is part of a good leader. Similarly, a missional leader ought to show a readiness to interact with other people. For example, parents, as noted by Milk 2 respondent, it says that one of the areas where I found leadership working is where we do interact with the parents and they do understand what we are doing. Consequently, to be an effective missional leader, according to respondent, the third respondent, sometimes you have to swallow your pride, and turning down for the other is always good. That was the view from the third respondent. So given this field data-based understanding, conceiving mission as a transformative venture pegged on the model of Christ and the early church resonates with Bosch's definition of Missio Dei, which according to him entails epiphany, the making present in the world of God the Son. What has not been clearly articulated from the field data is Bosch's view of mission as mediating the love of God the Father and that of the Spirit, issues which point out the relevance of Bosch in supplementing field data-based understanding of mission as essentially a Missio Dei. So in what follows, we will consider some of the barriers and enablers for missional leadership. In this case, the term enablers refers to the availability of the opportunity which, if explored positively and creatively, would lead to achieve a sustainable missional leadership. So we begin by looking at barriers. It emerged from the respondents that identity politics, in reference to social, religious, economic dynamics, and denominational limitation, are some of the barriers to achieve missional goals. In this case, identity politics, of course, refers to group values, norms, and traditions that reflect people's understanding of who they are. Thus, indicators of identity politics could range from cultural, economic, social, religious, to political preferences as means for preservation of a community's self-understanding of who they are. So with that, then we move on to the social values and try to find out how they posed some barriers. These social values and norms expressible as observed by the respondents, for instance, such as keeping pets and closing gates, could pose a barrier to interaction with others. Respondent 1, emphasizing on the same, said this as he went to the mission, as he was doing his mission in the South Coast. This is what he said. Keeping a dog creates a big barrier. That is, it acts like a barrier in reaching out to the people in Shimoni area. This is the southern part in the coastal part of Kenya. He continues to say, keeping your gate always closed acts as a barrier in achieving your goals as a missionary. So similarly, another respondent showing how social values could be a barrier to missional enterprise. He noted that also in Kenya, we got different cultures. Basically, people from the upcountry and coastal people, our cultures are slightly different in that most of the people in the coastal region have been brought up in a kind of relaxed way of handling issues. That is the observation of milk respondent number 2. Therefore, while the above narratives reflect a barrier to missional occasioned by cultural differences, in spite of sharing a common Kenyan citizenship, a failure to honor religious norms could equally pose a barrier to mission. As we see from respondent number 1, he said that while he was at Shimoni, he noted a billboard. And this is what he's saying about that billboard. A billboard at the Shimoni area indicating whoever enters into this community should strictly maintain the Islamic culture. According to him, this inscription on the billboard, of course, it is an aspect of identity marker, but a failure to observe it then could create a barrier to the mission because you will not be accepted. Therefore, summarizing the social values, it actually means keeping dogs or doors open, keeping dogs and also keeping doors open, cultural differences, and some advertisement as those in the billboard posting. These are reflective of social values that posed barriers to missional leadership, particularly because they may cause some difficulty of interaction with the local community, either when you fail to observe them, or when you simply ignore the values that are reflected there. For example, as it is reflected in the billboard at Shimoni, that whoever enters into this community should strictly maintain the Islamic culture. So the next thing we want to look at is religious norms and how they posed as a barrier to missional leadership. It is important to heed the call by the community to honor other people's religious norms to establish rapport with the community, as we have noted above. But further to this is then to know that religious differences that are pegged on gender bias are also prone to promoting male chauvinism, pitting men against women, as it was noted by Milk 3 respondent, saying that, especially for me, as a woman, reaching out to Muslim men would not be an easy job, because as a woman, I am supposed to sit, I'm supposed to remain in the house, end of quotes. Consequently, in such a social environment, which is replete with competing religious and social norms and values, communities are likely to experience tensions or even conflict. And when he attempted to introduce Plan International Compassion program in Kenyan South Coast to support educational programs in primary schools, respondent number 2 was confronted with the difficulty of making a choice between giving educational support and sharing the gospel. And this is what she says. This is where parents may not want their children to be taught about the Bible, but they want their children to get support from the project. But when it comes to Christian programs where the children are to learn about Christian faith, they are not comfortable with that. End of quotes. So the next thing we want to look at is economic values and how they could pose as barriers to missional leadership. Likewise, economic barriers have the potential to fan social tensions. These tensions are mostly exacerbated by ethnic perceptions pegged on the coastal upcountry divide narrative. In this case, land economy is a major contributor to these tensions, whereby, according to Milk respondent number 2, he observed that the locals, the coastal people, sometimes they feel this is their land, and they would argue, other people are benefiting from us. These people are visitors. They are just settling here. They are making it in life. These are the observations of Milk 2, which portray the function of a kind of them and us, kind of a them and us situation, which is could easily promote negative identity politics, the kind of which has the potential to ignite and perpetuate a violent response if not addressed properly. In this context of tensions occasioned by religious and economic concerns, one would expect the various church denominations within the vicinity to be united and provide a common missional approach. To the contrary, as noted by Milk 1, a respondent at Shimoni area, denominational centeredness posed some limitation to missional leadership. So as we look to denominational centeredness, Milk 1 respondent gave his observation of Shimon area. He said this: I have already seen a difference between a missionary and those ministering already existing churches. Many of them do not understand cross-cultural work. When I arrived here, that is at Shimoni, where I am, I tried to bring together pastors running small denomination to bring them on board on some trainings on how we can together reach out to the unreached people groups. But they could not understand me. And when I tried to explain to them, they said, oh, in our church policies, our structures do not allow such a thing. So they kept off. And now it was like an opposition to what I am doing and what their focus is. End of quotes. So given Milk 1 observation above, denominational constraints posed a challenge to missional leadership, challenges which are prompted by self-centered denominational policies. Whether or not in reality there are denominational policies that forbid interdenominational missional engagements is a matter for future research. Summarily, therefore, noted from the above brief thematic analysis is that identity politics pegged on differences in cultural perception, such as ethnicity and male chauvinism, socioeconomic practices and values posed barriers to missional leadership. Consequently, in this kind of a social context, the obvious question becomes, what are some of the insights regarding enablers for missional leadership that could be discerned from this social context? So then, with your permission, let me move now to the enablers to missional leadership. Bosch's suggestion to this question is for us to design a theology of mission which embraces a dual aspects, namely dimensional and intentional aspects. On the other hand, by dimensional aspect, Bosch insists on the task of missiology in seeking free partnership with other disciplines for it to enter into dialogue with other disciplines. On the other hand, the intentional aspect refers to the need for missiology to embrace globalization by stressing the local realities and challenges of the underdeveloped world. While Bosch's dimensional aspect of missiology has the potency to allow missiology as a deductive theory for elaborating Christian discipline such as church history, systematic theology, and theology itself, there is a danger of using this approach. A danger is that one could end up classifying a missiology to fit within these Christian traditional disciplines. In other words, one could easily constrain the place of missiology to become like a subset of these disciplines. You know, if the social experiences related to missiology are not taken into consideration. But missiology should be regarded from an inductive point of view to safeguard special contribution to Christianity as a discipline with its own limits and contributions. However, Bosch view intentional aspect of missiology as a reference to the need for inductive theory to facilitate transformation by embracing globalization while bearing in mind of local realities can be clarified by, for example, following some of the ideas that emerge from Kirk-Franklin research. Kirk-Franklin has advanced Bosch's position by clarifying the function of intentional aspect in missiology. By putting this concept together, globalization and globalization to changing global context to respond to effects of globalization and other factors, as these issues cannot be ignored. Here we can see, in a way, Kirk has therefore shown the way of how we can modify the ideas of Bosch and make them better, and also in a way to accommodate missiology as a discipline of its own. In other words, Bosch's intentional aspects suggest the need for intentional approach to church missions, whereby collective local contexts contribute greatly to elaborate the significance of Missio Dei, a position underscored by Franklin's reference to globalization and glocalization in Missio Dei. In this case, Bosch suggests an intercultural approach to church mission. The importance of intercultural approach in enabling missional leadership is discerned in the context of contribution of different geographical and cultural contexts. The need for intercultural missiological perspective in achieving missional leadership goals is underscored by Franklin's reference to glocalization and globalization as a central aspect of Missio Dei. Moving forward, it is crucial to elaborate the place of local context in elaborating missional leadership through the participation of local community. To this end, key missional elements that will be discussed are interdisciplinary approach, community acceptance, role model, team player, and contextualization of the scripture and prayers. So let's look at interdisciplinary approach. Milk 9 respondent taking departure from the former Archbishop of the Anglican Church of Kenya, to illustrate the importance of interdisciplinary training, described this Archbishop as a highly educated person. He went on to say he had done a BA in history, geography, and sociology. And so according to this missional, this respondent, he goes on to say, so Gitari was more of a social scientist. Consequently, the respondent observation that David Gitari started to initiate programs that could transform the lives of ordinary citizens in Kenya, like establishing schools, hospitals, economic activities like agriculture, where he would engage transformation to train ordinary farmers. And of course, this therefore underscores the influence of interdisciplinary training in securing social interests. Of course, taking an example of Gitari, as it is told by this respondent. The other aspect that could help in terms of providing enablers for enablers towards missional leadership is mediating the love of God through the leading of the Holy Spirit. Similarly, expounding the metaphorical importance of body of Christ as signifying that we are to continue with the agenda of restoring humanity beings back to himself. Milk respondent procures the importance of community-oriented theological aspect in achieving missional goals. In this case, the position of Milk 3 resonates with Bosch's view of Mission Day as mediating the love of God the Father, who is the parent of all. Although this perspective of mission is community-oriented, that is, it begins by assessing community social realities in the context of the love of God, it must be procured under the conviction that the Holy Spirit, like a wind, blows where it chooses, and you hear the sound of it, but you do not know where it comes from or where it goes. Of course, these are the words borrowed from Bosch. Of course, the freedom of the Spirit in this case to lead does not underrate the need for community's acceptance of a missional leader. So the next thing we want to see is a community acceptance. Elaborating the acceptability of a companion who introduced him to the community at Shimoni as a voluntary teacher sent by African Inland Church at Shimoni area, Milk 1 respondent describes that companion as one who had good relationship with the community. He interacted with the community, and he used his influence to introduce me to the community leaders, and the government officers as well. End of quotes. Similarly, underscoring the importance of community acceptance, Milk 3 noted, for example, where we live in this city of Mombasa, it's very difficult for us to exercise and execute our leadership because of Islamic surrounding. When we go out to door, I will always go with the 2 men so that the men will do the sharing, the real sharing. But as a woman, talking to them sometimes becomes very difficult. They will brush you away. But when you go in the company of men, they will be able to listen because they know the men are doing the work to you. Again, we see the importance of community acceptance here. Although we have seen it again in the other part, it could also be a barrier to missional leadership. The next thing we want to look at is the role of prayer and team player. Additionally, to introduce and sustain missional work in community, one's ability to embrace team player and a voluntary attitude collectively provides a great opportunity. Milk 1 asserts that a missionary just needs to be like Jesus himself, who has given out his life and everything for the sake of the gospel. End of quotes. Attributing his success to his ability to embrace Jesus' leadership role, a role model, Milk 1 respondent goes further to say, if there is need in the community, we participated together with Muslim leaders. I volunteered to teach I interacted with the community, and not as a pastor, but as a teacher. I was given a role to be in charge of Christian education in the school. I am also a social person. I'm very open. I respect what they believe in, end of quote. In this case, therefore, we can see Jesus' type of role model in the disposition of Milk 1 respondent. For instance, in his participation and interaction and his description of himself as a teacher who volunteers to teach Christian programs in a Muslim-dominated area, is doing it voluntarily, is not on a payroll, is just on doing it voluntarily. Of course, he has a small business he has set up there and is selling food to the people there. But beside that, he's also teaching the children of the community who are mostly Muslims. Milk 4, underscoring the need for role model and team player, he observed it. He says this: we had a team of intercessors, and their responsibility was to pray for all church projects, to pray for the pastors and whatever is happening in the parish. We had teams of over 50 people for the development team, which we decided to divide it into 3 groups. One was the secretariat, the other finance, the other technical team. So we delegated responsibility to all these teams. And within a period of 4 years, we had achieved a big part of what we wanted to do, because we built a church in one of the areas that we had targeted, end of the quotes. So besides role model and team player, we can briefly, before we come to the conclusion, let's look at the last theme, which is on contextualization of scripture and prayers, which would help us to understand how we can discern enablers to missional leadership in the social context within the coastal part of Kenya. Contextualization of scripture and prayers. Milk respondents explicitly indicated that success in missional leadership is not guaranteed without the assurance of scriptural contextualization for the benefit of the community. For instance, according to Milk 3 respondent, God's creation of a man and a woman to help one another needs to be embraced in the African culture, especially the culture here in Mombasa, so that we are able to see participation and the contribution of both a man and a woman into the development of our communities, end of quote. Besides scriptural contextualization, prayer of team of intercessors whose responsibility is to pray for all church projects and for the pastors and whatever is happening is essentially important for securing missional interest of the church as a community of believers. Similarly, praying before responding to community needs, as it was observed by respondent 1, praying before responding to community needs that could transcend one's financial capabilities is important in securing rapport within a community. Milk 1 respondent noted that after prayers and just talking to them, those barriers were broken. If I tell them I don't have money to support the children, of course, they would understand, end of quotes. So to the conclusion, this is what we recommended. To suggest practical ways of testing the importance of local communities' participation in enabling missional leadership goals, we recommend a missional paradigm that puts emphasis on mediation of God's love in Trinitarian aspects of Missio Dei. The purpose is to critically assess the place of social values, religious norms, economic values, and denominational centered practices in procuring missional leadership goals. Not only does this approach ensure the emergence of intercultural understanding of mission arising from social, economic, and religious and political local realities, but also it guarantees that the participation of these local communities in elaborating missiology does not contradict Christian doctrine of Trinity, but instead it expounds the social relevance of Missio Dei. In other words, and as Susan Weinen and Niemand reminds us, this missional relevance, this missional underscores the fact that God calls his people to participate with them in his mission. This privilege is not a command to take over. Mission is not our task. It is God's mission, and it will be accomplished according to God's will and his ways. End of quotes. And that, of course, gentlemen and ladies, it brings us to the end of our long lecture. And thank you for your patience.
Your stop share. And for those of you online that would like to make a comment or ask a question, if you go down to the bottom of your screen, there's a button called reactions. And if you push that button, and then it'll say raise hand. If you raise a hand, I will see it and I will call on you. I'll start us off. And Susan, I don't know if you want to join us as well in answering questions, but that's up to you. But what's the next step? Are you going to take this study and publish it? And are you going to distribute it? And if you're going to distribute, where are you thinking of distributing the research findings?
Oh, thank you for that question. Yeah, we have thought it together with Oscar and Laena that once we present the paper, then we'll get the feedback from the participants and review it. Yeah, and then we will consider submitting it to a publisher, a journal publisher, and see whether we can get further recommendation from peer reviewers, and then we allow it to be published. So at the moment, we'll be seeking advice from Kirk Franklin and Susan Weinen, where we can publish this kind of work. Yeah, but I'm sure Oscar's got something also to say in that regard.
Go ahead, Oscar.
Oh, yeah. Thank you very much, Manjewa, for your great lecture and also for your question. I think in terms of the practicing level, I think we are also thinking about developing a theological or missional training program to actually facilitate the missional leadership in Kenya. And this is what we are gonna further develop based on our research finding and, as Manjewa said, the actual needs of those on the field. Yeah, this is what I want to answer. Thank you.
Sarah, go ahead.
Thank you for your presentation. And I'm glad you said that about your work is still a draft and you're open to comments. I have a few questions, but I'd like to put two questions together. First, from the methodological point of view. You says you have interviewed on the 11. The reason you stopped interviewing more people because you reached a kind of saturated area. That is why you felt there is no any new responses in this. But when I'm listening to your topic, it is so wide and it is so in relation to missiological understanding, Trinitarian and Missio Dei and all these things is very wide. First, how do you define saturation within that only the 11 things? That is my this question, because you cannot reach in this such a big topic after 11 interviews saying you reached to a saturated position things. And the second part, again, related to the missiological, sorry, I'm asking both my questions at the same time, because then you can respond to that. The second one is related to, again, methodology is, Oscar did the interview via Zoom in UK, and Laena did the interview again via Zoom in Canada, and you being in Kenya. Have you shared your experience in the to see whether there has been any change of responding, change of, or even tones or that kind of things in relation to compare your experience you receive your data from your participants. And I think my question again related to the methodology is, why do you choose only 7 participants to present your paper out of 11? Do you know what I mean? I have a little bit the methodological issue.
Yeah, thank you, Marjorie, for those questions. I hope I can remember you. I will remind you. Well, I will give some answer, and then Oscar can also give his own answer, because we are all in this journey. So to your first question on defining saturation, yeah, we can say in this case we sort of looked at it as a concept that would show we have done enough, and enough of what we need. Of course, enough of what we need does not mean there isn't any more that other people can see. Yeah, so we would ask questions, and we'll reach to a point where would say, have we done enough? Then we say, yeah, sure. And then how do we determine we've done enough? We look to the interview guide, and we realize all the questions have been answered, and some of the questions, you see some of the respondents repeating themselves in one way or the other. Yeah, but again, this is a subjective way of looking at it, and you can actually say that our saturation may not be really like watertight, that nothing else can be done after this. Yeah, there is still more that can be done, but it's a way of limiting ourselves to the task so that we can be able to deliver some results which can allow us to keep working and moving forward. Yeah. So to the 2 questions on methodology, how Oscar and Laena, who are separated from me geographically, of course, what happened is I would be here on the ground organizing the respondents to make sure that they keep the time because of the time difference. UK and Kenya, I think, has got time difference of 2 hours. Canada has, I think, around 7. Sometimes it's 8. Yeah. And then I'll make sure that they are on board. Sometimes it required me to call both of them using WhatsApp. Could call Oscar using WhatsApp, and also times call my colleagues here in Kenya using the ordinary phone, because the ordinary modes of calling, because they're just close by. And when we are sure now the time is ripe, then Oscar would go and connect with them through WhatsApp and record the information. So that's how it worked, and how that guaranteed the credibility of the information, that in terms of sharing the experiences, it all worked by because after we got the interviews in audio clips, then we shared them among ourselves so that Laena could listen to Oscar's recording, Oscar could listen to Laena's recording, and also I could listen to both of them. Yeah, just like when I wrote the paper, I would take it to them. They would put they would inject some ideas there. So we kept working around ourselves, so that it's everything that we are doing is actually clearly agreeable to the three of us. And when we say now this is the time to move to the next step, then we'd be all ready to move to the next step. And the third question on why I chose only 7 out of 11, surely this was a question of time constraints. I just picked them in terms of their number. We numbered them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, up to 11. Then I was working on the first 4, and then later on I worked on the first 3. I know it's not the best method that is there in the world, but at least I was trying to make sure that at the end of the day, we have gathered some information which can be used to answer the question. And of course, later on, we can again go back when we are done with this presentation. We'll come together and find how we will move forward with the other 3 that are still pending. Yeah, so that's how I came to the decision of 7. It's a question of time constraints, and because I'm also teaching and also doing ministry in the church, and sometimes I find I don't have enough time. Yeah, but thank you for those questions, Majori.
Can I just again sorry, Tom. The reason I says, for example, if one of my PhD students says, I only managed to, because after that saturated, what I would suggest them, I would say, perhaps you need to revise your questions, consider evaluating your question. The reason, because what I was listening to your participants, I realized the participants are mixing together their understanding of a missionary and their understanding of the leadership. There was a kind of, and I would say, okay, revise. Do you need to revise your question and to have a new question? That is the other one about your team. I didn't mean about the time or even medium, though the time and medium speaks a lot when it comes to collecting data. I meant from the cultural and contextual point of view, who they are, because you are dealing with one article from different cultures and different backgrounds and contexts. That could be a strength, and that could be also limitation, and both. And perhaps you do need to address the strength and the limitation of doing an article having 3 authors from 3 different backgrounds and from 3 different geographical situations collecting data. If, for example, you address that and point what are the strengths of having that and what are the limitations of having that. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, madam. Thank you so much, Major. That makes a lot of sense. It can't be said better.
Go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Manjewa, for your presentation last week, this week, and I really took it. We heard enough about your research problem and research objectives and contributions and different things, but we never heard about your research question. So if you tell us about your research question, then it can help us to understand your project better. Secondly, my second question is about the location of your samples. Are they from the same town or city, or they are scattered in the whole country? Kenya is a huge country and it's a plural society with a variety in different things. You have many ethnic groups, subcultures, and different kinds of social norms, different places. So if they are from different parts of the Kenya, it's okay. But if they are from one particular city, how can you generalize your findings into the whole country? And my third question is, when I looked at your findings, the barriers and enablers of the missional leadership in Kenya, I think they are very general. I mean, if I do the same research in Korea, I think the findings may be similar to each other. So I want to ask you, what is the uniqueness of the Kenya in your findings? What are the contextual elements of your findings, particularly in relation to Kenya?
Yeah, thank you so much. Israel, if I got your name right.
No, my name is Christian.
Oh, Richard. Okay, thank you. Israel was in the other session, and he looks like you. So thank you for that correction. Yeah, I don't know whether I don't know whether Oscar, you want to make a contribution by answering this question. But let me then begin. So what is our research question? Of course, our research question, although it may not have been clearly demarcated as a research question, but the question for this paper is, what are the barriers and enablers to missional leadership in the 21st century Kenyan context? And the word Kenya is there, of course. And how can we use this small sample to make a generalization? Yeah. Of course, before I come to that, let me answer the other question on the respondents, where they come from, whether they come from the same locality or they are from different places. Yeah. Or they come from different cultures. Of course, in terms of locality, they are all coming from within the Kenyan coastal area. It's a stretch of, I think, about 30 kilometers within Mombasa in the southern part. That's where most of them are located, in the coastal part of Kenya, where we have people from different backgrounds coming together. You know, even if they're Africans, they will have different, they'll be coming from different tribes, different ethnic, there are also different races within the Kenyan coast. We also have different religious traditions. We have Christian, we have Muslim, we also have Hindus, and we also have we have Jews. There's a time when I saw a Jewish synagogue somewhere here in Mombasa. So that would be the kind of the larger social context. And most of these respondents are actually leaders of the churches that are, again, not all Anglicans. Majority are Anglicans, Anglican ministers who are serving in different capacities. Some are in the parish. There are some who are in the prisons, some who are serving in theological institution, and so on. But we also have other leaders from different, for different denomination, African Inland Church, and also there's a lady from the Baptist, and then we have Baptist, African Inland Church, and then the Anglican. Yeah, so in terms of their culture, we can say denominational cultures, they're coming from different denominations. But in terms of their African cultures, cultural making, they are also from different ethnic groups. Yeah, but they all classify themselves as church leaders. Yeah, they have one commonality, which is they are church leaders. They are leaders of some denomination, leaders doing some mission, or leaders doing some kind of a ministry within the coastal areas. And it is on account of this small sample of the coastal area that, because these people are also coming from different parts of Kenya, although they are settled here in the coast or they are doing some work here, there are some who are coming from as far as western part of Kenya, but they are doing their ministry here. But their birthplace would be somewhere in the interior of Kenya. So then we said, yeah, sure, this could provide a sample for a study of missional leadership in Kenya, but then within the coastal part. Yeah, it's within the coastal part. We left the larger title of Kenya so that in future we may want to go to other parts of Kenya and do the same project. Yeah.
Or did you want to add something?
Thank you for those questions.
Hi, hello, yeah, Manjewa. Hi, thank you very much for answering. I'll just add some more information. And there's actually a specific focus on the targets we research about, which is on the DRU, Diocesan Research Units of the Anglican Diocese of Mombasa. So there's a specific case which is used to explore the phenomenon. So of course, this research project needs further development and also needs constructive criticism whether this actually could apply to other parts of Kenya, and this is one. And also, yeah, I think this is on the something about research question I'd like to add. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, the one thing, Oscar, though, that you guys answer is what's uniquely Kenyan about this? I mean, the findings are all very general, and as Wei Chun suggested, might be as true in Anyang in Korea as it would be in south coast of Kenya. What did you derive that was uniquely part of the context and framework from where you're at? I mean, when you're, I think I might want to go back to the data and find out what is uniquely Kenyan in that, because there's all kinds of general studies that sort of give out general frameworks, but paying attention to religious norms, paying to social values, being a nice community member, being polite. All these are very, very important, but that's true in a whole lot of places.
Oh, thank you, Paul, for that question. Yeah, I hope I got the name right.
Go ahead.
I'm baptizing people today. I'm very sorry for that.
Yeah,
but the unique thing with the coast, particularly Kenyan coast, is that it is one of the places where early missionaries actually approached this part of East Africa from. Yeah. It's a place where people like Kraft and others like Newman, and also there are others who'd come later on that now planted the I would say the Anglican Church and other denominations, but there are those earlier missionaries like Kraft, and who came in the Kraft was in 1844. That is almost in the middle of 19th century. Then we have others who came in 1904, like Beans and so on. Of course, these ones they also be following the footsteps of Kraft. What we realize is that the way they responded to the situation is that there are some aspects of, for example, cultural values that they did not really take a keen interest in exploring them. Of course, they did a wonderful work of planting Christianity, including schools that are there and hospitals and the ancient churches. But then we realize the issue of culture, or the issue of taking note of the cultural dynamics is not really elaborated in their works. There's a book that Kraft has written, and it's found in one of the theological institutions in the coast. And he does mention some of the cultural dynamics, but he doesn't really see a lot of positive aspect of it. Yeah. So we therefore said our approach is very unique, because we are looking at the social context area in which earlier missionaries came through, but they seem to have used a different approach. And for us, we are going to use an approach that would really help us to explore these issues of culture and social values in order to see whether they can have any positive and negative impact to church missions. Yeah.
Okay, what I would like to see though, before we publish this, is the specific cultural dynamics you're referring to. You just can't talk about cultural dynamics. You can't talk about just generalizations. I would like to see specific examples of things that are unique cultural dynamics that they missed that you caught. I didn't hear that in the paper. I think, at least for me as a researcher, I would want to see these specifics, but I don't see specific. What I'm hearing is generalities, but not specifics. So that's where our criticism is coming from. Is good study, you're touching on key themes, but if you are distinguishing yourself from Bosch or Kraft or others, show me exactly what they miss and what you caught. Specifically, for instance, don't walk the street on Wednesdays, or this cultural practice within this framework of doing this, showing your feet to a neighbor, was done and now is no longer, is not appreciated and alienates you, but very specific stuff that people can take, not just a big word like cultural dynamics. That doesn't tell us anything. So a study needs to zone in on specifics that we can refer to, so we can gather something from that, rather than we should pay attention to social factors and cultural dynamics. That seems just, yeah, of course, but what's the next step? So, yeah.
Thank you, sir. Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Bishop, is it?
No, Reverend, not a bishop.
Talking to a bishop.
Bishop Alfred from Chile again this week, and I appreciate these good beginnings. Good beginnings.
Yes,
Obviously,
thank you.
we're doing local mission, it sounds like, and I would also like to hear more about your endeavors to do cross-cultural mission and, you know, the definitions of mission. There's so many. Your recommendation is a very good one. It is a bit like what Bosch says anyway, but I wish that our Chilean missionaries had listened to that or thought it through. Why I say it's a good beginning? Because you're forcing national missionaries, I presume you're talking about African national missionaries, you're forcing national missionaries to think through mission, strategy, and get to leadership. So when Chilean missionaries who had big churches in Chile went off to Spain, and they thought they would plant great churches in Spain, they came back with the tail between their legs. They were terribly, they failed miserably. Portuguese, Brazilian missionaries who went off to Africa, Portuguese-speaking countries, also crashed. And I'm wondering how much of your study will take this into account, the failures of African mission, because there's so much to learn from that. We would have now, I think this would apply much better to Chilean mission today. We would be thinking through these things a lot more. So it's great beginnings, but I wonder if you thought, you must have thought through it, but how you will incorporate African failures into this study.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Bishop. Yeah, that's a very good question. Yeah, it's something I think we have briefly thought about it with Oscar and Laena, but we have not explored. And I think because now I'm on this side of the research, it's going to be my responsibility to explore these ideas, which as Paul Bender has suggested, and also you have emphasized, of observing the failures, of course, alongside the successes of early African missionaries or early missionaries to Africa, particularly in the coastal areas. Yeah, so this is something we will discuss with the Oscar and Laena, and we will really want to give a good talk, a thorough research in that, because we have the sources. They are here with us in East Africa and other parts of the world. People like Kraft, you know, they are known all over and they've published a lot. Yeah, but thank you so much. I never thought of the idea that we could have some missionaries who thought that to do mission is to cross borders, and then rather than beginning from the home country and crossing over. Yeah, so but also the other thing is sometimes at the home country, people may just be relaxed and see themselves as on the receiving end. Yeah, this is one of the things we wanted to challenge, that you can be a missionary even where you are, and you can do something even with very little financial assistance. Yeah, so those are some of the ideas we'll follow through in terms of broadening the perspective of this paper. Yeah, I don't know whether Oscar's want to say something.
Thank you very much. I think I would like to answer the previous two questions. I think, well, just add some information because Manjewa has already said very well, and you have provided sufficient details. I think, yeah, thank you for your question about. I think what you've said, I think especially the case could be put on the reflection part before conclusion, but after the qualitative findings, and this can be used as part of our reflection, the success and the failure, and what we could critically evaluate our previous understanding of mission from everywhere to everywhere, and starting mission locally. So I think this can be used in our part of reflection, which can also inspire our practical action as part of our contribution on the field. And thank you very much. And also in terms of the uniqueness of Kenyan context, I think, I myself, coming from East Asia, when I look at the distinctiveness of Kenyan context in relation to culture, I found one very important, I would say, uniqueness would be the conflicts between Christianity and Islam. I think that has also been mentioned by some of the interviewees, not just one, but several, who have mentioned about in certain Islamic cultures within certain contexts in Kenya, Christians, especially Christian missional leaders, were viewed as outsiders or even enemies, and there were legal restrictions, and there was causing security concerns for those Christian missional leaders who might face threats to their personal safety, and also because of certain misunderstanding or even stereotype put on the Christian missional leader from those from other religious beliefs and practices within, specifically within Kenyan context. This could pose a significant barrier for the missional leaders in Kenya. So I think this might answer some of your concerns about the distinctiveness of Kenyan context. Yeah, this is what I'd like to add. Thank you.
With that, let's put our hands together and thank you. And I appreciate your lecture. And so with that, thanks again. And we look forward to looking at the publication. So we'll bid adieu. Bye-bye.
One question, sir. Can we have the recordings so that can help us to review the paper, please?
Yes, go ahead and send, I'll send it, I'll make a copy and send it to you, okay?
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.